Hey everybody, this is John for MTG Nexus coming at you with another quick deck overview with a deck I wish didn't exist anymore. That is All Spells in Modern. Now this deck was part of the triumvirate of terror that forced the banning of Simian Spirit Guide. That included this deck, Belcher, and Neoform combo. Now, all three of those decks took a huge hit by losing Simian Spirit Guide. Really forced the decks to adapt or just kind of disappear, along with Ad Nauseam combo. Really took kind of the legs out from underneath all-in spell-based combo that wasn't Storm. So what this deck tries to do is it tries to get simply either a copy of Undercity Informer or a Balustrade Spy in its hand, get to 4 mana, mill its entire deck, and then kill you. How it accomplishes this varies based on the game situation, but Undercity Informer and Balustrade Spy both mill until target player reveals a land, and they put all the cards in the graveyard. Well, if you're playing no lands in your deck, your entire deck's going in your graveyard. From there, the deck tries to get back a copy of Narcomoeba. With Narcomoeba, it brings back copies of Sword of the Meek, since it tries to attach to a 1/1 creature. These three come into play, allowing you to get your copy of Salvage Titan. Salvage Titan allows you to cast it by sacrificing 3 artifacts rather than by paying a spell's mana cost. What this does is it allows you to bring back any copies of Vengvine that happen to be in your graveyard, which is going to be 3 to 4 copies of Vengvine. And then from there, you try to beat your opponent down as quickly as possible with a copy of Memory's Journey to buy you a couple of turns. There are some built-in protections to these decks. Notably, Phantasmagorian allows you to discard 3 cards to return Phantasmagorian from your graveyard to your hand. Not great, but this does allow you to put extra Vengevines in your graveyard, etc. A lot of versions run a second copy of Narcomoeba simply so they don't draw both copy or the singleton copy and kind of get screwed in that regard. And then finally, Thassa's Oracle allows you to potentially win the game the following turn, or if you happen to have it in your hand, you can mill over your entire deck, put Thassa's Oracle back on top with Memory's Journey, cast Thassa's Oracle, and then win the game that way. And then you also have a singleton copy of Charbelcher. Kind of does it the same way the Charbelcher deck does. As far as the rest of the deck, you're playing either... in addition to the Vengevine combo, you have 4 copies of Creeping Chill. So between Creeping Chills and Vengevines, generally you're going to be able to 20 your opponent out of nowhere. And then you play all of the spell-based lands as possible. Shatter Skull Smashing obviously being the worst. But you get to play Malakir Rebirth, you get to play Maria's Call, Seagate Restoration, Turn-Tempest Xeviosis, Agadeem's Awakening. Spell versions of them really aren't that particularly relevant, but they allow you to have your colored mana. And then you play all the 2-mana accelerators you can. Pentad Prism, Sphere of the Suns, Talisman of Dominance. All of these allow you to go from 2 mana to 4 mana, which allows you to kill on turn 3. Jack-O-Lantern allows you to exile it for 1 mana out of the graveyard to fix your mana problems a little bit. This can help potentially cast a Memory's Journey or a Thassa's Oracle on a key turn. That's pretty much what the deck tries to do game 1. Game 2, obviously, this deck is vulnerable to a lot of the hate, whether it be graveyards or counterspells on Undercity Informer, Balustrade Spy, or being taken via Thoughtseize. So to counter that, you have the usual tech you would see. 4 copies of Line of Sanctity to fight against any type of discard spell decks. 4 copies of Pact of Negation to help fight against the counterspell decks. Now obviously you would love something like Veil of Summer, but this deck really doesn't have the mana to spare anymore, especially with Simian Spirit Guide gone. Void Snare is kind of a nice catch-all as a way to balance any problematic permanents, to keep your opponent from graveyard hate or anything they might have in play. Allows you to kind of balance the permanent thing at 1 mana. Downside, being a sorcery, but it does answer pretty much everything. 1 copy of Grief to help clear the way a little bit, along with potentially something like Palaka Predation, but really these are kind of slow and clunky. Grief allows you to at least have a second creature to cast and strip your opponent of resources they're relying on to win the game. And then obviously a couple copies of Charbelcher as an alternative way to win the game if your opponent just has too many, say, graveyard hate cards to be playing up against. This version is doing things a little bit differently. Obviously the core of the deck is still the same. This version is running the Pact of Negations in the main to have that kind of protection. You still have the 2 copies of Narcomoeba, like I kind of commented on how some of these versions run 2 copies. Put the Thassa's Oracle on the sideboard and free up those slots. But, you're still trying to do the same thing. Cast a Simian Informer, cast Balustrade Spy, mill your deck, Vengvines, Creeping Chill, win the game. You have your outs with Salvage Titan being able to come back with Sword of the Meeks. And then, instead of playing Memory's Journey, this version was choosing to play Nexus of Fate. This is kind of allows you to buy a turn, because it will, when your entire deck mills, this goes back on top of your library, buying you 1 turn, so, in case your first attack with Vengvines isn't enough, oftentimes the next swing will be good enough. And then the rest of the deck kind of self-explanatory from what we already talked about. The sideboard options in this one, a little bit different. This version has the Goblin Charbelchers also in the sideboard. Jack-o'-lantern as a way to fix the mana. I presume it's kind of a 3-of package with these 3, with Jack-o'-lantern, Thassa's Oracle, Memory's Journey in the main deck, as opposed to the Pact of Negations that were on the sideboard. Fragmentize and Prismatic Ending, the chosen ways to deal with artifacts and enchantments this way. Fragmentize deals with pretty much everything that you can care about in terms of permanent-based hate. Deals with Leyline, deals with Rest in Peace, deals with the Spell Bomb-based style hate, etc. This version also opts for copies of Silence against counterspells, which is quite nice. Very similar to Veil of Summer, but this just shuts your opponent from casting spells down, period. So you can kind of cast this, force them to either counter this or the coast is clear. And then Leyline of Sanctity obviously being kind of the key card against decks with Thoughtseize, Grief, etc. Now, obviously this deck used to be capable of mostly turn 3 kills, turn 2, turn 3. The turn 3 draws require one of the mana dorks, mana ramp, either Talisman, Sphere of the Suns, or Pentad Chrism, and then obviously having a 3rd land on turn 3. So this deck is a turn 3 combo deck, even as things stand. The downside is, obviously, you're a little bit light on a fast starting mana, so the Charbelcher plan gets a little bit worse. And then, obviously, you're still vulnerable to graveyard hate, you're still vulnerable to counter spells, you're still vulnerable to discard spells, especially game 1. And then, you have to fight through things like Endurance, Leyline of the Void, Rest in Peace. Also a card like, Sanctifier and Vex doesn't really hit you because of, it does hit the Creeping Chills, but it doesn't stop the Vengevine part of the plan. So there isn't as much graveyard hate as there used to be, but, you still got to learn to play through that. You got to learn to play through counter spells. So game 1 tends to be the game you really want to win, and then you got to find a way to steal game 2 or game 3. Now, I have not played this deck in quite some time, and even when I did play the deck when it was legal, or not legal, but it was in its better form, I was not the best at knowing when to do that. There were people like Sodek and stuff that specialized in this, Belcher and Dredge. But, might be a deck worth pulling out and playing on occasion, catching some people off guard with some turn 3 wins. And, as long as you're comfortable with mulliganing to 4 or 5 to find an Informer or Balustrade Spy and then having enough mana to operate, this could be the deck for you on occasion, especially if you don't play the modern format a lot, or if you have, a high-end deck like is it Murktide or Amulet Titan that requires a lot of thinking, and maybe you have a night where you just want to play a deck that really doesn't require a lot of thinking, especially game number 1. This could certainly be a deck that could be a decent backup plan. And it's not a deck that sees a lot of play anymore, so people may not be as familiar with how to attack it. But still, a deck that pops up every now and again. It's had a couple of small results, some 5-0s, and I think it tops 2032 to challenge or something recently. So I figured we'd highlight it again on the channel. Deck you should be aware of. Once again, Modern is a format full of a bunch of decks that have gone extinct, but still pop up on occasion. Decks like this, decks like Belcher, decks like Nightfall combo, I think is one I've seen recently. So these decks rise and fall out of favor. There aren't a ton of pure combo decks in the format anymore, but this deck is certainly one of them, and certainly a deck that can win on turn 3 rather consistently. So if you like these kind of deck overviews, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and hope to see you for the next video.